Mormon moms strive to be the pinnacle of mothers. They often have many children and want them to be perfect Mormons too. But what happens when those Mormon moms are a bit unhinged? What happens when their children are in fact human and cannot be perfect? Last week we looked at the monstrous Ruby Frankie, and today we look to murderous Lori Vallow. Hi, my name is Shelby, and this is Merrily Morbid, the channel where we explore all things that are at least a little bit dark, from deadly diseases to natural disasters, from true crime to man-made catastrophes. So if that's your kind of thing, come along and let's get morbid. Tylee Ryan was only 16 and J.J. Vallow was only 7 when they were both killed by their uncle at the orders of their mother and the man who would become her 5th husband. In the end, there were 6 people who were dead. So what the hell happened? Our main villain, Lori Cox, was born June of 1973 in California to a Mormon family. And, like many Mormons, she got married young. She was only 19 when she married her first husband, her high school sweetheart. But the marriage didn't last long at all, just about a year. A few years later, in 1995, Lori married her second husband. This time she had a son, which she named Colby. But again, the marriage didn't last. By age 24, she'd already been married and divorced twice. In 2001, Lori Vallow married her third husband, Joseph Ryan, and together they had their daughter Tylee, who was born September 24th, 2002. And in 2004, Lori divorced her third husband. I do want to say that her first 3 marriages probably can't be described as positive or healthy, as they were marred by infidelity and abuse on the part of the husbands. But it's almost like Lori was done being the victim and now wanted to be the victimizer. Only 2 years later, Lori walked down the aisle a 4th time, this time to Charles Vallow, and this marriage lasted quite a while, far longer than her other ones. But this time, Lori seemed to be the one in charge. They seemed to be happy, though, from the outside. Later in their marriage, in 2014, the couple adopted Charles's great-nephew, JJ, which was short for Joshua Jackson. The reason why he was given up for adoption was that his parents weren't capable of taking care of the autistic toddler, but he seemed to slip right into the family, and he was absolutely adored by his new big sister. Tylee and JJ ended up having a very close bond and were close up until the end. In 2018, the first tragedy befell the family when Tylee's dad suddenly died from what was determined to have been a heart attack. Later that same year, things changed as Lori began attending religious meetings that weren't actually being put on by the Mormon Church, but was still based on Mormonism. This group believed that the end of the world was at hand, among other religious ideas. Members of the group stockpiled food and supplies in preparation for the end, and as time went on, some, you'll see who, began stockpiling weapons, because cults and weapons go together like peanut butter and jelly. They also believed that they were able to communicate with spirits and tell if people were possessed by evil spirits. So now that you know a little smidge about their crazy beliefs, let's move on. In October of 2018, the Fates brought Lori and Chad Daybell together at a religious conference in St. George, Utah. George had written many books on the coming end of the world and was a staple at these conferences. A friend of Lori's noticed that Lori and Chad were talking quite a bit and that they were being pretty flirty considering each of them were married to other people. By that time, Chad Daybell had been married to his wife for 28 years. But that same conference, the one where he just met Lori, he told her that they had been married in a previous life. Moving a little fast, don't you think? A month later, when Lori's husband Charles was out of town, Chad came to town for another conference, but this time he stayed at Lori's house. A friend of Lori's believed that they had been together in the biblical sense. She also said that Lori had told her that the Mormon angel Moroni and Jesus had sealed them in the temple. For those unfamiliar with Mormonism, Moroni was the angel that gave the golden plates to Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon religion, and sealing is essentially a spiritual marriage that binds a couple together for eternity in the afterlife. In December, Lori confessed to her friend that she believed that her husband, Charles, was going to die by the end of the month in a car accident. And when that didn't happen, she told the friend that Charles was still alive because Satan wanted him alive. What? Girl's getting a little cray-cray. Then, in January of 2019, Charles texted a family member revealing that Lori had accused him of cheating on her. Projection much, Lori? It was that same month that Lori told her friend that Charles had become possessed by an evil spirit and that they would need to cast it out. Also in January, Charles realized that his wife was getting freaking weird, and he begged her to get help. But when she did, she was found to be competent. Because actually believing that demons are possessing your husband is the picture of mental health. Within weeks, Charles realized that their relationship couldn't and shouldn't be saved, and he filed for divorce. As for the reason for their divorce, he said that she believed that she was a deity and she was waiting for the second coming of Jesus.
She thinks she's a resurrected being and a god, and remember the 144,000. Jesus is coming next year.
He also believed, correctly, unfortunately, that Lori would have him dead before she would give up her life's mission. A month later, during the separation, Charles changed his $1 million life insurance policy beneficiary from Lori to his sister Kay, who was the biological grandmother of JJ Vallow, the adopted son. It was around this time that Lori disappeared for 58 days and took off for Hawaii without telling anyone. Without her kids. Didn't tell a soul. Okay. Surprisingly, and in my opinion, suspiciously, when Lori reappeared, she wanted to reconcile with Charles and they got back together. And along with JJ, they all moved to Texas. All the meanwhile, Chad is still often flying in to see Lori when Charles is away working. It was in late spring of 2019 when Lori told that one friend that Tylee was dark, which I'm guessing meant that Lori believed that she was possessed. I want to jump in here real quick and ask you to subscribe if you haven't already. I am trying to make this channel my full-time job, and so that way I can bring you more morbid topics. I am only at just over 100 subscribers while I'm filming this, and my goal is to get to 500 subscribers by the end of next month. I know, it's a huge goal. So, if you are morbid like me, help me get there by hitting the subscribe button now. Okay. Let's get back to the video. By July of 2019, Charles had been trying to get Lori to confess to her affair with Chad, and after weeks of denying it, he told her that he was going to go to Idaho to tell Chad's wife about the affair. It was only 10 days later when Lori's brother, Alex, shot and killed Charles. That's pretty suspicious timing, don't you think? Alex claimed that he did it in self-defense, but eventually, it was ruled a homicide. Ballistics showed that Charles was on the ground when he had been shot, but for some reason at the time, it was never really investigated. What is sick is that Chad Daybell was the one to arrange and pay for Charles's remains to be cremated and then shipped back to his family. The same day or the day after he paid for Lori's husband's cremation, he sent texts to Lori that seemed to imply that he was planning on killing his own wife. But he didn't want it to interfere with his kids' college graduations. Okay. Weird priorities, but When asked by Lori's friend why Lori didn't just get a divorce from Charles and, suspecting that it wasn't an accident, she said it was because she didn't want Charles to be punished by God for being divorced. My ass. She wanted his life insurance, and she had no idea that he'd changed the beneficiary. A month after Charles's death, Alex, the brother who killed him, took out a $21,000 loan for, quote, medical expenses. Again, my ass. That money was used over the next few months to buy 46 guns. In mid-August of 2019, Lori submitted a rental application for a house in Rexburg, Idaho. Lori says on the application that they are moving to the area so that her daughter can attend BYU, Idaho, which is in the same town. You know what's also in the same town? Chad and his wife and family. Pretty ballsy to move to the same town as your married lover. Also, Lori lied. Tylee wasn't enrolled at BYU. Then, just a few weeks later, on September 8th, Tylee is seen for the last time during a family trip to Yellowstone National Park. The next day, Cox was on a property owned by Chad in Idaho. Chad, the same day, September 9th, texted his wife to tell her that he'd shot, killed, and buried a raccoon in the pet cemetery. No, he didn't. What he did was bury Tylee's body. Yet, Lori continued to use Tylee's phone and access her bank account. And by September 20th, Lori had completely emptied her daughter's bank account. And tragically, that was the same day that JJ went to school for the last time. The following days, Lori hosted her friend and her friend's boyfriend for the weekend along with Chad. It was during this weekend that Lori told her friend that she now believed that JJ was possessed. Now you ask, wasn't she suspicious of where Tylee was? No, because Lori lied and told her that she was at college and that's where she was that weekend. It was during this weekend that Chad had a dream that he predicted that his wife wouldn't live to see the age 50. It was also that same weekend that people saw JJ for the last time. Just 2 weeks after his sister was killed, JJ was seen being brought upstairs to bed by his uncle, and he was never seen alive again. They believe that JJ was killed at some point after midnight. On September 24th, Lori unenrolled JJ from school, claiming that he'd gone back to Louisiana to live with his biological grandparents. Just a week after being involved with the second murder of one of her children, Lori Vallow went on Amazon and bought a wedding ring. Oh, by the way, that same day, on October 2nd, Lori's niece's ex-husband was shot at as he arrived home. He didn't even have time to get out of the car before the shot was fired, but luckily it missed him. He had had a very contentious divorce from Lori's niece, and he was not a believer. The vehicle that the shooter was driving was a green Jeep Wrangler that was found to be registered to Charles Vallow. Evidence showed that, again, it was Alex Cox doing his sister's dirty work. Just 1 week after that, Cox, while wearing a mask, showed up at Chad's house and attempted to shoot Chad's wife, Tammy. I wish I could say luckily she survived, but it wouldn't be for long. Just 10 days after that attempt on her life failed, a 911 call was made by Chad. He claimed to have found his wife in bed, dead, apparently from natural causes. Unfortunately, at the time, no one had any idea what had been going on, and so there was no autopsy performed. At the same time that Tammy's funeral was happening, Lori was Googling wedding dresses that she could buy in Hawaii. Just 2.5 weeks, that's 17 days after his wife of 29 years died, Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow got married in Hawaii. If you lost count, that's 57 days after her daughter was murdered and 43 days after her son was murdered. Yeah. Now, a few weeks later, Kay, sister of Charles and grandmother of JJ, decided to check on her late brother's email account since he had given her the password before he died. What she found was a confirmation email of an Amazon order that had a shipping address in it. You guessed it, Idaho, Rexburg, Idaho. Kay hired a private investigator who was able to access the Amazon account and found that Lori had been using it and was looking for wedding-related items and had actually bought some wedding stuff weeks before her new husband's previous wife had even died. Just a teensy-weensy bit suspicious, don't you think? You know who else thought it was suspicious? The Rexburg, Idaho police. Yeah, Kay wasn't keeping that information to herself. And here is where it hits the fan. On November 26th, police showed up at Chad's and began asking questions. That mofo actually had the balls to say that he barely knew Lori and that they'd only met a few times. Dude, they already know that you guys are married. He eventually and reluctantly gave Lori's number to the police. The police had been at Lori's door knocking for hours to no avail. But once the police were able to speak to her on the phone, they were able to get her to open the door and let them in. They wanted to know where JJ was, and Lori told them. He was back with her friend in Arizona. But you know what? The police weren't buying it. They had no probable cause at the time, so they left, but they left with a mission. They were going to get a search warrant. The next day, with search warrant in hand, the police returned to the property. They discovered that the entire house had been emptied. Chad and Lori were in the wind. I don't know where they were in the meantime, but they were able to fly to Hawaii on December 1st. But now that the police were suspicious of Chad and Lori, the dominoes began to fall. On December 11th, Tammy, Chad's wife, her body was exhumed, and finally an autopsy was performed. And boy, did they find what they were looking for. The autopsy revealed manual strangulation. Literally, someone squeezed her neck with their bare hands until she was lifeless. When Chad and Lori called Alex to tell him about the body being exhumed, he told his wife that he believed that Chad and Lori were going to make him the fall guy for everything that had happened. But can you really be the fall guy when you're the one who did most of the murders, if not all of them? Just a thought. But then something really strange happened the next day. Alex died. What? Of blood clots in his lungs and heart failure. Natural causes. I am absolutely no expert, but if something smells fishy, it probably is. Although there is no way to prove it, since the timing is just too perfect, so to speak, I think that some kind of poisoning occurred. How it could have happened, I have no idea, because Chad and Lori were in Hawaii. Then, just 5 days before Christmas, it was officially announced that Tylee and JJ were missing persons, and that it may be in connection to the murder of Tammy Daybell. Then, on January 3rd, a search was performed on Chad's home, and many things were collected for analysis, which also included cell phones, journals, among other things. On January 25th, Lori was ordered by the police in Kauai, Hawaii, to produce the children to the authorities in Idaho within 5 days, which, of course, she failed to do. It was still 3 weeks before Lori was finally arrested. She was charged with 2 felony counts of desertion of children, resisting police, criminal solicitation, and contempt of court. Her bail was set at $5 million. And after 6 days of trying to get her bail reduced, she agreed to be extradited back to Idaho, where she had committed a majority of the crimes. But she thought that this would be beneficial to her. So on March 5th, Lori was sent back to Idaho, and she appeared in court the next day, where she did manage to get her bail reduced to $1 million. Girl, you didn't actually think that they were going to let your ass out, did you? A month later, it was revealed that Chad and Lori were now being investigated for conspiracy, attempted murder, and murder. It took several more months, but finally, on June 9th, we finally got at least a few answers. A search was conducted at Chad's home in Rexburg, Idaho by the police, the sheriff's office, and the FBI. And can you guess what they found? They discovered that Tylee had been buried in the pet cemetery near the fire pit, the same exact spot that Chad had claimed to have buried that raccoon, and JJ was found buried near the pond. At this point, Chad was finally arrested for his part. Over the next few years, Lori's trial would go through many delays. Finally, last year, on May 12th, Lori Vallow Daybell was found guilty of murder of her children, conspiracy to commit murder of her children, and conspiracy to commit murder on Tammy Daybell. She was also sentenced at the end of July and received 5 life sentences without parole. And if you have noticed that Chad and Lori have been in the news again recently, it's because Chad Daybell is finally on trial for his part in this whole thing. And as this goes up, they will have just finished day 16 of his trial. And that's it for today. If you haven't already watched my video on Ruby Frankie, I'll have that link below. And if you want to see more culty stuff from me, check out my video, When Religions Kill Their Own, where I discuss Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian Scientists, and exorcisms. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to be merry, but stay morbid.